CD, how would you evaluate your club season at the halfway point?
Yeah, look, it hasn't been where we had hoped it would be. I mean, that doesn't mean that the second half of the season can't be better, but we definitely haven't hit the heights that we were hoping for at the start of the season.
What can you really bunker down and achieve in the next week or so?
Oh, well, it's a good opportunity for the players to go away, the coaches to go away and have a bit of a reset moment, within the season. We know we've got some things that we need to well and truly tidy up if we're going to get on a roll and head towards the finals in 2025. So everyone gets a chance just to take a breath and reset from there.
Do you look at any kind of review or anything like that of what kind of happened so far this season?
Well, I mean, we review regularly. I think most of our people have been getting up and certainly highlighting that we've had issues from week to week that need to be fixed. I don't think that it is purposeful right now to go back and have a look at, pre-season in order to give us the best chance to have a look at, what's happening from here. I think we've got some shorter term focuses right now that we've got to get right from here.
This club's got a history of pulling itself out of tricky mid-season situations, but I don't think we haven't been this low on the ladder this far into a season. So what gives you the confidence that it is still possible to get things moving?
Well, I mean, look, we're 2 games and percentage out of the 8 right now. We have faith that our good footy has still been pretty good within the competition. We have spent time in the past being able to put runs of good form together, and that we don't think is too far away, but also acknowledge that we haven't played anywhere near the footy that we want. I still think there's a great opportunity if we can lessen the gap between our best and worst football, but there's still something to be achieved in 2025.
CD, can you kind of tell us how the succession plan, how it's working, is being viewed from your position in the football committee? Because everybody externally has a view on it. How's it been? How are you kind of looking at it? How's it going so far inside
the what, sorry?
The succession plan from Ken to Josh?
Well, I guess coming into this year, that if you start losing games, that people are going to be questioning that aspect of it. My preference right now is to look at the things that we can actually control for the rest of the year, and that is, to look at a game plan that's been set up that we haven't quite got right for long enough periods of time. Our midfield stoppage sort of work hasn't been what it was last year. Ultimately we haven't been able to defend very well behind the ball. So, not much has been going fantastically well for us this year, and rather than focus on, what you would like to focus on, I think that internally we've got, some actual practical things that we need to get right in the next, period of time that will and should take up more of our focus than worrying about succession plans.
So there's been no internal consideration as to expediting that plan. If things do start to seem as though finals are out of the equation or what have you, and next year becomes the priority, has there been any sort of internal plans as to what happens then? No,
look, I mean, right now we're in a situation where we're using the opportunity to reset and wanting to be far better in the second half of the year than we have been in the first half, and that doesn't include changing the senior coach right now. We're in a position where we have a good opportunity still to play good footy. We've announced what's going to happen in 2026, but we are well and truly coming back to what we can be better at in 2025.
So you're comfortable there's no correlation between performance and that plan?
Well, what I have said constantly with regard to the succession plan is I totally understand that when you don't play good football, that you open yourself up to people wanting to talk about any aspect of your club. Our job is to get back playing better footy. The irony, I guess, through this is that when we win, there's no talk about it, and when we lose, there is talk about it. So I think it would be easier for me to be able to answer that question if you thought this was an issue each week. It's not. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get back to focusing on the things that are practical, because there's a lot that's not going right in our game right now, and they're the things that we need to be better at in the second half of the year.
Would it be fair to say that Josh wouldn't want to start early? He'd prefer to start at the end of the year, not have to come in and I guess, take over a team mid-season?
I haven't had that discussion with Josh, as flat out as what you're saying there. I don't think that across too many sports worldwide that's a prudent way to go about things, especially when you've got a group who have a history of playing far better than what they are right now. It's not like this group of players or this group of coaches have been terrible for a long period of time. They just haven't. We haven't got it right this year. And that's certainly based on what has been high expectation of our team's performance over a period of time, because it's been good, far better than it has been bad.
In your regular discussions with Ken and the ones you might have this week, do you check in with him in terms of the results aren't going that way at the moment, the way he'd like at the moment, and that he still has the energy and the desire to see everything out to the end of the year?
Yeah, look, I don't think that has ever been a doubt with Ken. If there ever came that time, I'm 100% convinced that he would come and tell me that. But I haven't seen anything that would suggest that Ken doesn't have the energy for the job.
In terms of the reset and doing things better once you come out of the bye, is the game plan and the way you go about things on the table as well? I know Tyson alluded to it, I think, the week before leading into this game, that you guys, the coaching group, had discussed the way things look and they were going to continue the way they were heading. Is that still the same philosophy?
Well, if you look at what was the off season, we definitely have tried to do something different this year. Now that was personnel based. Having said that, we haven't had the fortunate, aspect of having a lot of our personnel out there that we had built our game plan around, and that's also not suggesting that we were going to get everything right, but. I'm sure that the coaches will reflect upon that, reflect upon the tactics week to week. But with the way that we're playing, I'm not going to sit here and saying that we're getting everything right. We have to reflect upon what is going to be our game plan for the rest of the year, because what is clear is that what we've been trying to implement over the off season and so far this year hasn't quite worked out the way that we would like.
Who drives that? Is that a collaborative thing between coaches? Is it does Josh have a say in it? How does that kind of work?
No, I mean everyone has. All of the coaches have a say in what they think is the best way for us to go about it. Clearly, the senior coach has the ultimate say. But our coaches, again, they've worked together for a period of time. This is the same group of people who took us to the position that we were in last year. So I have some faith that we can get it right. But what is clear is that we haven't played good enough footy to this point yet.
The size of the losses, see there, that would be something, and the regularity in which you've had those big losses be something you haven't experienced. Do you have a gut feeling as to why it's been so much uglier this year?
Yeah, I mean that's a fair thing to say. Definitely the gap between our best and worst has been as significant this year as in my time at the club, and a lot of that starts around the ball. If you're getting scored heavily against with regard to stoppage, which is an area of our game that we have historically been really good at, we haven't been as good there this year. So I think that ultimately our game is going to be based upon fantastic contests from a stoppage standpoint. We've tried to get more efficient in our forward line over time. We haven't been able to achieve that this year. You spend a number of games this year where, from a territory perspective, we've in theory won that battle, but just haven't been efficient enough to score. I think the start of the game on the weekend, I reckon Fremantle had 8 inside 50s and scored 6 times. I mean, that's not what has historically been the case for our team, and it's something that we're going to need to be clearly better at in the second half of the year if we're going to get going.
How surprising is that for you? Because as you said, it's not been an area that's been an issue, and we come into the season, we look at the Holy Trinity and we go, gee, there are 3, it's hard to find 3 better midfielders in any one midfield. So how surprising has that been, that that's been an area that's let you down?
Well, I mean, look, it's been surprising only to the extent that we've been really good there previously. So, the coaches have got to work through that, as the players do, to try and work out a way that we're going to be better in that area of play into the future. Obviously, Connor has moved into defence for a period of time. You know, we didn't have Horn Francis on the weekend. We missed Zach for a period of the year. You know, I think we've used the most number of players in the competition now to this point, which probably says that you're not playing fantastic footy and you're searching for answers. The fortunate aspect of that is that we have exposed some young players to AFL footy this year, and we've seen some steps forward there.
What sort of personnel will you get back in the second half of the year? Obviously, Lukosius is close. You've got Marshall. He's maybe a fair way off, but who's looking to come back in?
Well, look, we've got at least 2 players who won't play again this year, and we're certainly contemplating a couple of others right now with the mid-season draft not too far away. I'd imagine that Asava wouldn't be too far away after the bye. Horn Francis won't be far away after the bye. So we'll start to get, Sin will probably play after the bye. So I think we'll start to get some players back. I think Todd might be a stretch, but hopefully those guys can actually influence. We can get some continuity with the number of players, good players that we've actually got out there, which will be helpful in the back half.
What will you look for in the mid-season draft? What will you look for in that?
We'll take a balanced approach to that. I don't think that we would suggest that any one player is going to come in and make our team infinitely better than the players that we've already got on our list who potentially are coming back from injury. We're contemplating right now how many selections we actually have. I think that there's a chance that we have more than one, but we'll work through that over the next 24 hours or so.
So Walsh and Cochrane, are they on the long-term list, or can?
So Walsh has had his shoulder surgery and will be out for the rest of the year. Jacob Moss has had his surgery, but as a Category B, we can't replace him. I think that right now I would say that Cochrane and Todd Marshall are unlikely to play for the remainder of the year. So we've really got to work out what it is that we want to do there. We're certainly going to open more than one spot up. Whether that means that we take more than one selection in the rookie draft, in the mid-season draft, remains to be seen. But I think that for both Cochrane and Todd Marshall, right now it'll be a stretch for them to play this year.
So you're going to take maybe a long-term view with any potential person you bring in, and because Logan was able to really come in and add to the group last year in terms of playing, will you take a more long-term look with anyone you bring in?
Well, not really. I mean, if you bring a player in the mid-season draft, it means that you either see something in them long-term or you think that they could play straight away, and sometimes it's both. So, Logan Evans was a player last year who, we got to see through the pre-season. There are a number of players right now who we think can help us, certainly at SNFL level, that we might look to draft, who we think might also have the capability to be longer term AFL players.
Having seen Jack Hawkins for an extra 4 months, having just missed out on that spot, is he right on the precipice?
Yeah, he is. I mean, Jack's probably been our best SNFL player all year, and that's, in fairness, what we expected from a guy who had already played state footy in Victoria. He's one of the guys that we're certainly looking at, and if it's not in the mid-season draft, then I still think that there's hope for Jack. Yet longer term, he's shown that he's a quality SNFL player.
We don't see the players who are out of contract often say, "Oh well, I'll deal with it at the mid-season break." We sit down with Miles and twist his arm over this fortnight.
Miles, yeah. Look, Miles has got an offer in front of him. I think from my perspective, Miles has continued to show this year that he is going to be an absolute quality AFL player for a long period of time. Now, I really hope that's with Port Adelaide. He's stepped into a lot of our leadership stuff this year. He's gone into the midfield over the last couple of weeks and has certainly added another string to his bow. I think he's a fantastic player who, I certainly hope stays at Port Adelaide into the future.
You seemed surprised when you said Miles then. Did you expect another name? Where's things at with that?
Well, Zach Zach is less of a pressing need in the sense that he's contracted for another year after this. But again, we're not going to be in a position where we're either lowballing the players that we've got currently, whilst we're being linked to players coming into the club. We want to make sure that we're showing the right amount of faith to the players who are already here. Definitely not getting into a situation where they feel disrespected by the offers that we're putting to them. Zach's got an amazing offer in front of him, and Miles has got a very good offer in front of him as well.
This
Has Zach told you?
The offer to Miles is 7 years. I know you won't say the exact length, but it is around that longer term mark.
Oh, it's a long-term deal for Miles. I mean, the challenge that I guess a lot of the non-Victorian clubs face now is that in a very short period of time, there's been significant inflationary pressure, and we've been part of this as well, so I'm not discounting Port Adelaide as part of this, but the deals have gone from when I first started being 4 or 5 years, feeling like you were committing the rest of your life, to now being, in Connor's situation. I mean, Connor's going to be in a wheelchair by the time he finishes with us. So, Miles and the Victorian players will be getting those types of offers to go back there. So, we've got to be finding innovative ways to try and compete with those, and without going into the specifics, a player like Miles will have an opportunity to stay at Port Adelaide for a short period of time or a long period of time.
With Miles, when do you need to know about that? Obviously, you say the deal's in front of him at the moment. Is there sort of a time zone with these things so that you can plan around that?
Oh, look, we try and plan for every sort of situation. So as much as it would be great to know sooner rather than later, that's not me in any way putting pressure on Miles. He's a mature person who, I think signed his last contract a couple of years ago at around about this time. So, I'm sure he'll take this break to think, what he and Mika want to achieve from the rest of their life and go from there.
Has Zach informed you that he intends to at least honour his current contract at Port Adelaide? Stay till the end of 2026 at least?
Well, I guess there's two aspects of that, Simeon, and I'm sure you wouldn't think that I've got to go to every player who's got a contract and say, mate, are you going to be here next year? That's not the way that these things work. Zach is contracted until the end of next year. We expect Zach to stay, and we haven't heard anything different to that. And right now the club is wanting Zach to sign for an extended period of time. But again, that we're not putting any pressure on him in regard to that. He's already contracted to the end of next year.
Per that CD, and not to be facetious in any way, but I think in the last 6 years, I think it's about 50%, 50-50 players who've been traded have been contracted anyway. Dan last year had 3 years to go. Do contracts, have they ever meant less in footy?
Well, they still mean something, and unless you're getting something outstanding back, then you just don't entertain it. Or if you've got a player who you think is the type of player that you want to build the rest of your future around, well, it's a different discussion again. Dan last year, I think we've spoken about this a lot. Dan wanted to go. We took the opportunity, as much as Dan did, to make sure that we were able to get some new players into our club at a time where you're starting to fast forward to Tassie's inclusion if they can get their stadium sorted. With the players that you can actually bring in who you think are going to be helpful. Now, Lukosius comes in as part of that. Joe Berry comes in as part of that. Christian Moraes comes in as part of that. It's very easy to try and make an assessment as to whether that deal was a good one 6 months after, when Collingwood might be flying and we're not going as well. But I'd probably encourage you to think out, 5 or 6 years. I remember standing up and having many similar conversations with different people in this room. So that might say something about your longevity, but about Chad Wingard's deal. And I would have thought that most people right now would suggest, even though we had a great relationship with Chad, that deal went pretty well for Port Adelaide.
Chris, can we just get your reaction on the Darcy Ben-Jones incident, and obviously Alex Pearce being given a 3-game suspension? What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, I actually feel like Justin Longmuir handled that pretty well after the case. I mean, the tribunal is what it is. I think we would have all expected our, if Darcy was on the other side of that our player still tries to contest the ball. The suspension is what it is, but I don't feel in any way that Alex Pearce wasn't actually trying to contest the ball.
For all the focus on the succession plan, the alternative would have been to have Ken in limbo this year. Do you feel like that would have almost been a worse scenario, and are there any regrets around the way you went about it?
Oh, look, I think it's actually a reasonable point. What sometimes are the alternatives? You understandably have to answer questions about the things that are real, and for us, the succession plan is real, but sometimes it may be worthwhile putting yourself on the other side of that argument and saying, okay, if we hadn't done some of the stuff that we did over the off season, what would have changed right now? I imagine that there might even be more pressure on Ken right now. Now, that's not in any way to say that we're happy about that, because at 4 and 7 and feeling like we're not playing good footy, it definitely doesn't feel great. So, we got work to do, but right now, based on the fact that in the past the club has handled situations reasonably well, have been able to get on long periods of time playing good footy, my preference right now is to stay in that boat and to work with the coaches to say in the short term, we can be better at some things. Let's focus on what they are and see how the second half of the season goes from there.
Have you had any further conversations with the AFL in regards to the Indigenous issues that were raised in the Willie case? I mean, obviously, the Luke Beveridge, David Coxon added a bit more, few of the five. If you have any comments in relation to that, and then you added the fact that Tanya Hosh appears to be sidelined. Is the AFL handling, or has it handled this situation and the overall Indigenous landscape particularly well? Sorry, I know there's a lot of questions.
No, that's fine. And I'm happy to stay for a little.
You are?
We may as well get it out the way. I'm just going to stand here until you've got no more questions to ask. As I say, I quite liked that little drive-by about 5 years ago. None of you were in the room.
I was here, by the way.
Right, okay. No, look, I think it was memorable. It was clearly memorable. Look, I didn't really follow much of what David and Luke said, so I'll push that to the side. What the AFL did do is send every club a letter asking for the clubs to be open to providing greater feedback to the AFL as to how we can help our environments for Indigenous and multicultural players into the future, and for me that was essentially what we were actually asking. So I think that our club can take great pride in the fact that we push the AFL to ask the question, and let's hope again in a short period of time that all of the clubs are able to take the AFL's requests seriously and actually provide some good quality feedback, both from players and people who are involved at AFL clubs now, but maybe even more importantly, the players that are recently retired and not in the game anymore, to try and reflect upon what we can all do better.
Do you think having a list spot, or I guess having a draft pick, especially for an Indigenous player for clubs, do you think that would fix the issue, or go towards helping fix the issue of the lack of First Nations players in the system at the moment?
Well, I think there are some simple rules that the AFL can address right now about having more Indigenous players on lists. We've been pushing the AFL for a long time to say, if there's an NGA player at, let's use Adelaide, because this is a real example. A couple of years ago, I can't remember who the second player was, but I reckon one of the players that Adelaide had on their Cap B list was Tariq Newchurch, and the other one was James Borlase, right? So they didn't have another Cap B spot available. They had a couple of Indigenous guys who we actually quite liked, and if we could have had them on our Cap B list, with Adelaide passing on those guys at the time, it could have had another Indigenous player on our list. Now, I think you'd look at Port Adelaide's AFL list over time and say that we probably aren't, one of the clubs who we aren't a club who has ever shied away from drafting, an Indigenous player. But I think it could certainly help, the AFL into the future as to how you get more Indigenous players on AFL lists.
Speaking of NGOs, we've seen Dougie Cochrane out there doing some of his recovery, I think maybe last week. How is that application going with the AFL?
Yeah, I mean, look, from my perspective, I just want to be clear, that's nothing that I'm going to comment on today. I think that we have all, in some ways, put the cart before the horse in regard to that particular situation. What we've got approval for Dougie to do is his rehab. Here at the club, he's done 3 hamstrings, I think, in the last 12 months. And I think for the entire competition right now, it's best for Dougie to get his rehabilitation done right. And doing it here, I think, will be great for him.
Will Willie go back to Tiwi Islands over this break? And I think there was kind of a suggestion that if he did go back, he might not come back here. Are you confident? I guess, if he does go back to Tiwi Islands over the mid-season break, he'll come back to Alberton at the moment?
Yeah. Yep. I'm also confident that the guys who go to Bali will also return.
Ken won't be here next year. Will you definitely be here? I feel like yours is a name that gets linked to nearly every administrative job in the league. Have you? I
think that is what happens when you're a big familiar head that's been around for a while. So, I would like to see the future at Port Adelaide and certainly help Kari into the future where I can. But like most people who serve their clubs in a way that I try to, that'll be the club's call at the end of the day.
On that future, the club's been so steadfast in its distaste for the word rebuild. Is that a word that's entered your head at all when you look to the next few years and whether there's a need to go backwards to go forward?
I think that's always something that, so take the word rebuild out. You're often thinking about, well, what is the benefit of getting, games into X player, not only for, 2026, but also for the back end of 2025. We've at various points, you might say Christian Moraes right now, he's a good example of a guy who we've wanted to keep around the AFL team, not because we think his performance right now is exponentially better than whoever it might be that comes in and replaces him, but that, in four games' time, Chriso will be a better player than what he is right now. So, that doesn't have to mean a total rebuild, and you don't have to start focusing out to 2026 to start, thinking about, how we're going to be better in the future. And as I say, the future can be in 2 or 3 games' time. We're going to have the same sort of conversations around Jack Whitlock, who, right now, his numbers at SANFL level don't look anything special, but I think he's going to be an absolute player. Right now, when he's got amazing hands, can mark the ball. It might even find sometimes, and we're seeing this more, where players at AFL level sometimes look better than what they do at SANFL level because the overall level of skill in the game is a little bit better, with all due respect to the SANFL competition. So they're all things that we'll look at.
Will Josh drive any of that? Will he say, look, I think Christian Moraes is going to be an awesome player halfway through next year. Can we make sure we get enough games?
No, look, I think that Kari already thinks that Christian Moraes is going to be a really good player. And to Ken's great credit, he has never shied away from playing young players very quickly. So, I understand that everyone wants to work out which decisions are Josh's and which are Ken's. Ultimately, all of our coaches have an input into selection, but when we play at any level, Ken has the final say on who the team is that's going out there.
Is that going to be the same for the mid-season? Whoever you pick up in the mid-season draft is who's having a lot of a say there? Is it Ken saying, I might like this guy for this year, or is it Josh saying, this guy for...
No, Jason Cripps is the one who looks at that. I mean, he's got the responsibility for the list overall, balancing the short term and long term. So Cripper is here today. So he and I, once you guys have finally finished, I'll be getting back to that.
Can you guarantee Ken will be coaching around 24?
You know what? I am not the type that guarantees anything, Braden. But what I do know is that right now, and for the rest of it's 2025, isn't it? Of 2025, that we are steadfastly focused on playing better footy than what we have right now. We haven't hit the heights that we wanted to. It's been a disappointing first half of the year. That doesn't mean that the rest of the season has to go that way, and it certainly doesn't mean if we can start getting our better players back towards the end of the year that we shouldn't still be thinking that our best footy is good enough to give it a shake, albeit, as I said, the gap between our best and worst has been massive this year.